Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Beautifying Cities. I'm Kate Levin from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I am joined by Lily Kwong, landscape designer and director of Lily Kwong Studio, and Erin Harkey, the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. This panel looks at the role of nature, specifically horticulture and ecology, in making cities beautiful. I think over the past 2 years, the pandemic has really brought to the fore for us the need for places in cities of refuge, places that encourage social cohesion, and places that bring all kinds of people together, that no longer make beauty the province only of a certain demographic. So how do cities promote welcome in the public realm? We're going to explore this topic by starting out with looking at a couple of examples of the kind of work that Lily and Erin do. And then we're going to dig in, as it were, to see what are the key opportunities, priorities, challenges that we should embrace and address given the urgent pressures that we have in this country to create community. So Lily, I've been given true power. I know that's another track, but I have the clicker for the slides. Lily, the 14th Factory project, when we were talking, you explained to me that this was one of your first experiences in really going large scale with this kind of project. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So this project's called the 14th Factory, and it was a really interesting project because it was completely artist-led. I ended up sitting next to a man named Simon Birch at a dinner who had rented a 150,000 square foot warehouse in downtown LA, which had almost no green space. And he just started giving rooms to different artists and creators to kind of curate and create pieces that resonated with them, projects that were important to them. And this piece was my first large-scale botanical art piece. I studied urban design. My early career was spent in traditional landscape at urban design firms. When I started my own company, I thought I would go into doing more kind of residential and development projects. And then this project kind of led me down the path I find myself on today, which is using plants as an artistic medium and really using botanical art as a way to connect with community, a way to build community. And so this is about 5,000 square feet we created with a bobcat this terraformed earth. And this topography you see is actually topography taken from the Apollo 13 landing site, moon mission. So it's kind of this lunar landscape, and this idea of terraforming has been discussed, of making other planets like Mars habitable for human beings. And I kind of just wanted to spark a conversation around and problematize that. I find that a very concerning prospect or proposition, the idea of abandoning our remarkably beautiful and extraordinary planet for other realms. And as a result, I terraformed it with just sod, grass, which is kind of a dead material in a lot of ways. It doesn't provide ecosystem services. It doesn't support wildlife. And then kind of in the spirit of the founding artist, Simon Birch, I then gave my project over to, you see an image if we move to the next slide, on the upper right, to performance artists, musicians, community organizers. We did some plant giveaways in that space. Those two dancers you see on the top right is dancers from No One Art House, which is a dance collective founded in Los Angeles that really supports dancers of color, different body types, people who might be ignored by the traditional kind of contemporary dance culture. And yeah, it really set me on this direction of exploring botanical art as a way to kind of ground my practice instead of traditional landscape design.
You also said it taught you a lot about the longevity of certain materials?
Yes, it did. This was a very low budget project, and so we didn't have the resources for grow lights. I've since gone on and created You know, I created a piece called Summer and Winter, which was in Tribeca. It was in 1,000 square foot botanical garden in the dead of February in New York City, and we had the ability to bring in grow lights that were able to give the plants enough support to survive through the winter. In this piece, you see the bright green grass on the left, which was opening day, and then you see it kind of deteriorate and that kind of grayish brown in the dance performance piece. And I kind of thought it was a beautiful tie-in to the questions that I was asking around kind of space travel and how do we actually support plants when we're taking them out of environments that are native and actually supportive to them. So yeah, I think nature has these beautiful lessons to teach us. I see that life, death, life cycle all throughout the natural world. We're going to see it here before long when this beautiful, lush summer green turns to fall and then to winter, and then it comes again into spring. And so I really look to the natural world and connect so much with horticulturists and botanists because there's these incredible lessons plant life has to teach us. I mean, they're our older brothers and sisters. They have several 100 million years of evolution on us. And so if we look at kind of their resource sharing, the kind of balance between ecosystem, wildlife, I think that there's so many lessons we can learn from the plant world.
Which is a great setup to the one other project I wanted to have you talk through at the start, the Friends of the High Line. And the High Line in New York, repurposed industrial railway that for many has become a model of how you can reconceive and redeploy plant life, not in the sort of precious mode that has sometimes been done in the past. So talk to us about this project and how the High Line has been influential or inspirational to you.
The High Line is why I studied urban planning. I studied urban design at Columbia in New York. It's the most interesting and important, in my opinion, urban landscape intervention in the past decade and a half. It's become such a model, and you see it replicated from the Low Line into Miami, Beltline in Atlanta, and really all over the world of, you know, taking these industrial zones, the High Lines, this linear park, this industrial infrastructure, and then repurposing it for public space, urban green space. And what I love about the High Line is it was really neighborhood organizing and community-led. That is what protected that railroad. It was not a city plan. It was not a brand. It was not an institution. It was a community coming together around to save this, and now it's generated, you know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of revenue in tourist attractions, public art, and then they give over space to people like me, to other artists and designers to activate the space. So this project came as a result of the 14th Factory, and then I was given a great amount of resources to activate 14th Street to 16th Street, which is about a quarter of a mile. And I did 2 commissions for the High Line that year. One was this branded project, but the other one, if you go to the next slide, was a direct commission from the High Line for their High Line hat party. And you'll see an image on the upper left of these, you know, amazing hats and dance performance. And the piece on the bottom is a collaboration I did with an artist from Mana Contemporary named Mafalda Millies, and we created a piece for the branded project that I did. And I really think if you layer a cultural ecosystem over the planted ecosystem, you get this remarkable alchemy that really kind of grounds the community and opens their eyes to the beauty of urban nature and allows for a different kind of interaction with one another. And I think a lot of public spaces in New York, and I'm so excited to hear Erin talk about Chicago, do a great job of giving space to artists to share their work and to also bring culture to the city. I sit on the board of the Madison Square Park Conservancy Sustainability Committee, and they do such a great job of curating shows there as well.
So in part to set up the projects that Erin's going to show us, I do want to point out that the Highline started out as a community looking to save public infrastructure, but I can't resist giving credit to my former colleague Bob Steele, who's in the audience, for making sure that it did go on to become a key part of civic infrastructure.
And I think that's what's so interesting is when something emerges from the community and then you get civic buy-in and you get that kind of partnership, that's what's transformative.
So Erin is going to talk to us a little bit about exactly that kind of project, Millennium Park, legendary public-private partnership, and how you have thought about starting to reactivate that. And, ecology isn't just plants, sometimes it's people.
Yeah. Millennium Park is, of course, probably one of the best known, I think, cultural assets of the city of Chicago. Before the pandemic, we saw about 20 million visitors annually to the park. So it is the #1 tourist destination in the Midwest. And so I think we're constantly, and it's actually coming up on its 20th year of existence, believe it or not, which is pretty exciting. So we think a lot about, I think since I've taken over leadership at DCASE, how we continue to animate the space and activate it and make it a place that is interesting and people want to continue to return to. And the way that we do that is by engaging arts organizations and artists sort of as residencies to reinterpret the space. And what you're seeing is basically an image from a Chicago-based artist. All of the images that you'll see from me today are actually Chicago artists who developed a project called 72 Seasons, where he was in residence in Lurie Garden, which is one of the kind of primary landscape features of the park. There's obviously lots of landscape design happening in Millennium Park, but this is an actual open native plant garden that changes dramatically over seasons. So he did 72 seasons in a series of durational performances where dancers kind of reinterpreted the space. I think the slide before was a little bit about a site where the city, the garden, and the body become one, and I thought it was just a kind of poetic statement, not only for this particular project, but I think the way that we endeavor, to think of the city as a place that can become beautiful for the sake of people, right? People are always very much at the center and the core of the work that we do.
So if you want to go on then and talk about Riverwalk, because that is an extraordinary example of that, both in terms of its use of horticulture, public art, and conception of who are the people you're trying to serve.
So I guess not unlike the Highline, right? So it was a desire to make kind of a dormant space more active and more accessible to people. So that involved, obviously significant landscape design. There are different nodes along the Riverwalk to really create this kind of urban oasis in which people could have access to the Chicago River. So there are entertainment possibilities. There's opportunities to learn about the ecosystem of the Chicago River, which is, of course, a very important asset to the city. And also, as part of that, there is integrated opportunities for art and culture. Art on the Mart, which is not something we talked about before, but is relevant to the Riverwalk because it sits on the Riverwalk, is the largest digital projection. So we manage Art on the Mart, which commissions artists to do digital projections that kind of creates this outdoor exhibition space. We do active performances on the Riverwalk, and then we have this temporary banner program where we have been able to commission artists to do these kind of large-scale banners. And this is actually the third iteration of that program. I think really proud that all of the iterations previously have been commissioned by women of color. And this is no exception. Andrea Carlson is a Native artist, and the Chicago sits is the ceremonial, legitimate home of the Potawatomi Indians. And so I think we were in the process of really evaluating what was and wasn't happening in our public art collection. And one of the things that we've come out of some really deep analysis and assessment is a really deeper commitment to commissioning work by Native artists for the sake of both illuminating the history of that connection to that land, but also the current present day. Chicago is home to the third largest urban Native population in the country, so we have a significant sort of representation there. And so we saw, I think, an opportunity to do a very large land acknowledgement of that fact. The artist says that this is not meant to be antagonistic, but is meant to be celebratory, right? This is a statement of fact and of perpetual belonging. And so when I say it, right, I say it with a great deal of pride that you are on Potawatomi land. And I like this picture because there's lots of things happening in it. The actual banners sit over, which is one of the kind of kiosks for the architectural tour. And you see an architectural tour boat in the photo. So there's this kind of interesting juxtaposition of, I think, reality and commerce and a lot of things happening in that photo.
So one more project would love you to touch on, which was essentially an emergency response to the pandemic. So tell us about this.
Well, we were really fortunate during the pandemic that we had a private foundation approach us and say, you know, we want to get involved, we want to get artists involved, and so they gave us a really generous donation of about $750,000 that we were able to match. So we were able to launch in the middle of a pandemic a $1.5 million grant-making program for artists to just really get out there and go to work. And to start to commission and build projects that would help engage people in conversations about art and justice and the connection of all of those things. So we were able to give out $500,000 grants to individual artists, and also able to give grants to organizations that could then re-grant smaller grants to individual artists to do community-based work to help people kind of navigate the time, but also to get us motivated and activated in public space. So this particular project was actually one that had been in the works for several years. It's artist Santiago X, who is also a Native artist, and his intention was really to build that kind of presence, right, the visible presence of Native tradition back into the urban landscape by creating this mound. So it's a project that we did. It's at Horner Park, which is kind of on the northwest side of the city. So it's a collaboration between the Chicago Park District. We work really closely with them because they have access to a great deal of land that can be developed for public art projects. This is in the kind of very beginning stages as a kind of natural ecology. The work will evolve over time. But we were able to open it on Indigenous Peoples Day in 2021. Yeah. It was a kind of really good kind of first foray into that effort. We also commissioned through that project a number of other kind of art and kind of social justice connection projects. So that's part of the kind of portfolio that the department is building at this particular time.
So this language of inserting the natural world into spaces that maybe have been deprived of that for various reasons that have to do with the economics of cities is one of the touch points of our conversation. But Lily, you had the opportunity to insert the natural world into a major public space that was completely unexpected, this project in Grand Central. So can you tell us a little bit about this, and that you did it in record time?
I think we did do this in record time. We received a commission to bring the natural world into Vanderbilt Hall, which is, you know, this iconic 6,000 square foot room in Grand Central Station. And we built these 15-foot tall mountains in 11 hours overnight before commuters came in the morning.
So if you do the time by inch, it's like, since you
yeah,
go ahead.
It was pretty wild and wonderful and completely wacky, and it feels like a lot of our projects take this kind of whimsical fantasy approach to plant life, because it's, especially in the center of New York, I mean, we do have these great public spaces, but it's a pretty concrete city, as so many of our cities are. And so you kind of have to imagine what's not there, not seen. And I continually return to these mountainous forms and this topography because I think it really plays with scale and kind of challenges the urban status quo. You know, there's especially Grand Central is this incredibly gorgeous but very rectilinear space. You know, it's a lot of squares, a lot of rectangles, a lot of straight lines, and then when you bring these sinuous, organic, more kind of archetypally feminine forms, and we were really doing a lot of research on kind of different mountain ranges and bring that into that space, it really challenges, and you can see this photo, these were some commuters kind of arriving in the morning, and it really stops people in their tracks. And I think, you know, I grew up in the Bay Area, I grew up in Muir Woods, essentially. My house was 10 minutes from the Muir Woods National Monument, and if any of you have ever been there, you know it's this truly awe-inspiring place, and I kind of just grew up in awe of the natural world. And I think our studio's mission is to reconnect people to nature through that sense of awe and wonder. And then hopefully, you know, people become stewards. And a lot of our projects really layer a lot of education, a lot of cultural programming that helps scaffold people towards more directed action. And I feel more and more motivated to do that after the past 2 years we've had.
So given the constraints of the past 2 years, just want to track back to Erin, because you talk about bringing green into concrete spaces. Some neighborhoods can't support the green, but this was another pandemic response project. So Erin, talk about this. This is sort of a way of bringing nature into the concrete world, except it's still on concrete.
Yeah, so this was another project that we were able to give a grant to, and again, just really looking to support projects that are at the intersection of a lot of different community and social issues. And so we gave a grant to the PICO, Pilsen Housing Collaborative. PICO is the acronym for short, and it's a housing collaborative full of artists that are in the Pilsen neighborhood, which is really at the center. Pilsen is at the center of sort of Mexican-American culture in the city of Chicago, and sort of the Latinx culture and population is the most growing population within the city. And so Pilsen is home. It has a very rich tradition. It's where the National Museum of Mexican Art is. It has a tremendous collection of murals. It is really an important community to the history of Chicago. But like all communities, is really challenged and threatened by impending development and the rising cost of being able to live there. So this collaborative was really formed in response to wanting to make sure that there were places in Pilsen where regular folks could continue to live and be, and artists could continue to live and be at the same time. So we were able to give them a grant to do this mural. I saw this picture. I hadn't seen it. I found it. It was a great article online, and our communications person sent it to us. I had seen the mural maybe 6 months ago, so I hadn't seen it in its like full finished state. But I'm just so impressed. And at the heart of it is this tree, right, which is about rooting and community. And you can see that there's just all of this kind of blossoming flora and fauna and the design, that helps to really activate the space. This particular site is really at kind of the intersection. The National Museum of Mexican Art is kind of cat a corner to it, so it's in a really lovely space, and it has this community kind of garden that's in front of it that they really do activate and animate and make accessible for people for various kind of community engagement and type programs. So again, this was one of the projects that we were really happy to support.
And the last example I just wanted you to talk about is this one, because now we've moved, there's no tree.
There's no tree, yeah.
The landscape is entirely created, but it's created in a way that I think speaks to the challenges that cities have in beautification. Yeah. Because greening isn't a possibility for a lot of patches of hardscape. So just talk us through what this represents.
Yeah. Well, I think there is an underlying kind of ecology, environmental issue that is kind of surrounding this. So in a lot of our communities, we focus, and the majority of our effort in this department in terms of funding arts and culture on the south and the west sides of the city, which are traditionally Black and brown communities, historically underserved. And one of the kind of prevalent challenges that we have is a pervasive number of vacant and underutilized spaces, so vacant lots. But the challenge with vacant lots is that a lot of them, because of history of industrialization in these communities, a lot of these lots are toxic, right? They're not available, right, to space to turn over immediately because they need significant remediation. So one of the kind of policy things that we've done in the last, during the pandemic is really taking a kind of significant inventory of all of the city-owned vacant lots and their status adjacent to remediation, so that we know, here are the lots that are ready to go, and that we can work in partnership with community to build things on, whether they be community gardens or any type of sort of public space that we can create. So this is one of those projects. This is a project that was actually not funded by DCASE, but was funded by the Department of Planning, which is also a really, I think, important thing talking about our work as a department. If we talk about how we beautify cities, like, art is not a standalone discipline. Art is a discipline that works, in this case, right, works in deep partnership with all of these other things: transportation, economic and community development. That's where we can see, I think, the most progress. And so the Department of Planning worked with a community organization that was led by an artist to really kind of develop the space. And so what you see is we've created this really vibrant mural. We've also, like, urban tactilism, what's the right word? Kind of these bright colors, and basically cemented this kind of vacant lot, but then added these bright colors. And on the other side of this, what you're not seeing is that there's this nice kind of green space with shading and trees. And the local CDC, the Community Development Organization, keeps all of the kind of furniture. So if we're in the summer months, we can kind of bring out the furniture, and we pull in food trucks and that kind of thing, and do performances there to keep the community active. This is in Austin, which is a community on the west side of the city. And it's part of an initiative called Invest Southwest that Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who is our mayor, initiated when she came into office, to really marshal city resources, because if we can stack investment, then we can move from multiple city departments, then we can move a lot further together. So this is one of the projects that came out of kind of that joint collaboration.
So ecology clearly has a lot of meanings when it comes to cities. It involves plant life, it involves other forms of community beautification. And so hopefully what these images have done is create a sense of the world of possibilities, different kinds of methods, different touchstones for this. But Lily, I'm wondering if you can talk us through what seems to be kind of at the core of your practice, your challenges. When we spoke, you said that you're trying to get your clients to lead with ecology, not just aesthetics, and that as part of that, you've become so much more aware of the role of native plants versus exotic plants. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about that difference and why you think it's significant.
Yeah, I think, before the world shut down, that was all those projects I showed you were pre-2020, and the focus was really on beauty and community engagement and culture. And then the world shut down, and all I had was my backyard. And as I started looking at my backyard, and I started doing more research, understanding more about the native ecology, I connected with a resource in LA where I'm based called Theodore Payne, which is this incredible conservation nursery. They do a ton of seed banking, resource sharing, but the greatest thing they do is propagate native plants. The more I understood the support that native plants give to it gives humans a sense of place, and they have their own beauty, but also what they really do is for the non-human entities that we share our environment with. So wildlife, bees, butterflies, birds, they provide an enormous amount of food, shelter, places for safety, to lay eggs, to create their homes. And so I started the process of removing all the exotics from our backyard and replanting it with native plants. And as I did more research, I realized 80% of our backyards in America are exotic plants that provide no ecosystem services. So if you take the example of a native oak tree in Los Angeles, that provides food and shelter for over 200 species. Whereas an exotic palm tree, of which there are so many in Los Angeles, might only support 2 or 3 wildlife or critters. So I think that's something that I'm really focused on in this next chapter, and there's so many vacant lots in Los Angeles. Erin's from Los Angeles, so knows it well, and I think I have this vision in the next chapter of my practice in taking some of the focus away from what might be considered traditional beauty and focus on cultivating a new kind of beauty that takes us outside of the realm of just an anthropocentric view of things. And that feels like the task of the next chapter as we face the climate crisis really head on.
So that's an extraordinary new challenge and set of values for your practice. Erin, working in the world of public service, many of the conversations here this year at Aspen have reflected a kind of passive-aggressive attitude towards what government should or shouldn't be doing. What is your response when people ask why the government's involved in beauty at all?
Yeah. Well, there's 2 ways I kind of want to answer that question. One, I think I told you kind of a story. When I was really early on in my career, I was working I'm from Los Angeles originally. I moved to Chicago 6 years ago. I was working in LA County for the LA County Arts Commission, and we were presenting on a project in kind of one of the kind of more conservative areas of LA County, which is 4,000 square miles. It's massive. And I was there with the supervisors of Eurosclosy, and a woman came up and she was irate. And she was like, "You mean to tell me that we're spending taxpayer dollars on art?" And he was like, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Next question." And it was completely dismissed. And I've taken that attitude, I think, throughout my career. I'm not making any apologies about spending government money on art and creativity and investing in artists who are people who need to live and work and eat and provide so much value, right, to our communities. I think the other thing that I'll say is that there definitely has been, and I don't know if you feel this too, but a kind of consciousness shift because of COVID, right, in the way that people understand and value art and creativity because it was taken from us in a way that was really cruel, right? And that we didn't maybe understand, that we couldn't access theater or we couldn't do the things or performance or go see a music show. And so I think people had a kind of awakening, like, whoa, this is really important, right? And so I think we're seeing a lot of progress actually instead of a why is government spending this money to government should be spending more on these things because these things are important to our quality of life, and not only in the joy sense, right? They do bring a lot of joy, but they actually do real work in communities to help beautify, uplift, create a sense of social cohesion, give us platforms to talk about really complicated, really hard issues. And so subsequently, because of this, right, our department got an influx of $26 million, which included $10 million from the corporate budget, which is now permanently in our budget. It allowed us to increase our grant making from an annual budget of $1.2 million, which was pitifully small, right, for a city of our size, to now a baseline, a grant-making budget of $12 million that we immediately pump out to organizations and individual artists, and then another $16 million in the Recovery Act funds that is just going to go to recovery and relief programs and also to fund work like this in communities. So we're seeing, I think, the opposite happen, right? And that was the biggest, right, influx of cash to DCASE, which is the department I run, in the history of the department. So yeah, we're going to go with that as a strategy, as the path forward.
So before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to follow that up with one, I think, extraordinary insight you had, Lily, when we were talking. You said when people are afraid, they won't change. And so part of your strategy is by, you also said people in New York City are landscape blind. You need to hit them with big gestures. That seems to be a sort of practitioner version of what Erin is saying. But could you expand on that a little bit? How does beauty make people less afraid? How do you think it opens the door to change?
I mean, we're human beings. We crave beauty. Arts and culture have always been a part of our societies, really. I think the oldest cave paintings were discovered around 60,000 years ago, whereas modern agriculture was only 10,000 years ago. So I always think, wow, human beings needed to create art in some way before they were even concerned about kind of optimizing food for ourselves. It nourishes our soul and is really the universal language in so many ways. And I think, a lot of my work deals with bigger concepts or challenges around climate, ecological collapse, and urban blight or urban challenges. But I think leading with beauty, a place where people feel safe, where community can gather, it sparks a different kind of conversation. And we only protect what we love and what we understand, and so much of what makes people fall in love, I think, with both the spaces that we work in is having artists kind of anchor that space and invite people in. And there's so much to be scared about right now, and so it just feels like even more of a call to action for the creative communities in our cities to kind of rise up and become leaders and create space for people who have really been destabilized through all the challenges our society has been facing, as of late.
I do think part of the theme that you both are pointing out is that the language of nature is also particularly powerful, because in some ways it gets past, people can have aesthetic concerns. My version of beauty isn't yours. I like this work of art, I don't like this work of art. Much harder to push back against work that very specifically addresses the natural world. And I think that's particularly interesting to think about as we are sitting here in the world of Herbert Bayer's take on nature and how that can be formulated to create an opportunity for change for various kinds of growth. So want to open it up to questions, but before we do, just want to thank so much Erin and Lily.
Thank you so much.
So I see a hand up here.
This was so interesting. Thank you. I wanted to just talk about some things I've observed in children's play with the influx of Afghan families that we've had come into the Denver area in such a large degree versus other parts of the North America, and especially in the last 2 years. And the importance of setting up the right play areas in our city so that they can be seen, not necessarily separated from the community when they're very young, playing in their traditional clothes at parks. And how do you suggest I go back into Boulder, which is an incredible city, but help generate ideas on how to apply for grants and funding so that we can have parks that have suggestive murals that show their assimilation, but also show the need for our assimilation as Boulderites, to allowing them to be visible in our coffee shops, at our playgrounds, and then transportation too, out of the areas where they're living, which is mostly the surrounding areas of the city center, because of urban sprawl, and creating that pathway for them to get to the center of the city.
So Erin, you want to take that? The age-old question of how can art play nicely with other governmental departments that often have all the resources, but not so much of the public will.
Yeah. Well, I'm see if I can kind of understand a little bit of, and if I didn't answer it correctly, if I'm not touching on it, let me know. But I think you mentioned parks, and the parks are incredibly important. And I think, if a lot of cities are kind of constructed very differently in terms of how they plan for and support culture. Like, not every city has a D-case, right? Has an entity that is solely responsible for culture. Culture might be the function of the economic development department. It might be the function of the tourism department. It could be in various kind of places within city government. So I think finding who your kind of governmental ally is, whether it's in the Parks Department or some other place that has the ability to be a vocal advocate for you and also help you navigate, which is very challenging and sometimes defeating kind of bureaucracy in order to get these kinds of approvals that you need to be able to access a park.
The phrase soul destroying was invented.
Yeah, access a park to be able to paint on it. Like, they will throw 20 million roadblocks to that, right? So you really need to find, I think, a partner and an advocate within government to help you kind of navigate those systems. But I think that the grants that you're gonna apply for, right, as a grant maker also, right, I read a lot of grant applications, will be stronger, right? The more of those kinds of partnerships that you can indicate that you have, right? You indicate that you have both the consent and the partnership of the authorizing kind of government entity, the park system, right? Having that support, and then also having, the support of community organizations to help kind of fuel this, right? I think funders, and I think Kate can kind of co-sign on this with me, like to see really collaborative partnerships. So building that kind of coalition around you of people that can have, not everybody has to have expertise in everything, but you want to get the best partners that you can that know how to navigate both the government systems, the partners that know how to work with artists, right? The partners that know how to work with communities, and then the partner that really has the resources and expertise to be able to move people, right, to you, or to move the kind of community that you're talking about building kind of more connectivity with. So I think building that coalition is really important.
Thank you. Other questions? Right here?
Yeah, so I'm from New York, and I love the High Line.
Just give the microphone one sec, if you don't mind.
Thank you. So I'm from New York, and I love the High Line, and I'm wondering if you could comment on why that succeeded and other projects that are going around in other cities that in some sense attempt to emulate that.
I mean, I think, as you mentioned, there was this, and as you were just talking about, there was this incredible coalition of different entities. I do think there's something incredibly potent and powerful about it starting within the neighborhood and within the community, because then it's this organic and very authentic need and desire within the community. I would kind of say that to your question as well. I sat on a panel yesterday around influence, and one of the pieces of advice was literally just asking the community, what would it take, or what do you need? So I think that is definitely one element. And then there was a huge amount, as you mentioned, of civic support for the project. I also would go back to what this panel is about, which is beauty. Like, Piet Oudloff is the horticultural designer, landscape designer who did that project. And it's just so awe-inspiring what he did from an ecological standpoint. I think, as someone who studies plants and loves horticulture, the biodiversity, the use of native plants, some of these things are very difficult for people to articulate, but I think that is very much felt. And then, as we were talking about the cultural or artistic ecology that was layered on top of it, I think the level of beauty and impact that it made on that area of the city is really profound, and it's something that I think goes really far. I think it was also already so integrated into the urban fabric. I mean, some of the other projects that I've seen, they're kind of far away from the urban center, because it is focused on revitalizing industry, whereas the High Line is running over Chelsea, West Village, meatpacking. These are already very culturally significant parts of New York City, and so you saw you know, people like Diane van Furstenberg or the gallery scene in Chelsea kind of invigorating the efforts that were already happening. And so I think to your point that you just made, I think layering all of these partnerships that are really already working with the urban assets that are available is what's vital, instead of imposing kind of a vision on a neighborhood or on an area.
I think we're about done with time, but I think the key takeaway there is that beauty is hard. You have to have lots of people willing to say yes and willing to fight for it. But once you do, you create all kinds of momentum. Lots of cities want their own Millennium Park. Lots of cities want their own High Line. What could be better than to create the kind of consensus and coalitions that make those things happen? So thanks again, Lily and Erin.
Thank you so much, Kate.